like it. You're probably going to get killed. And so Jesus knows that if that's how they treated him, he even said that to the disciples, if that's how they treated him, then those who follow him should expect nothing different. Eventually, you and I who desire to follow him will have to take up a cross also. Last week, we looked at the first part of that, and it said to deny yourself. And we talked about how we're to say no to ourselves. And I ended it by reminding that when we say no to ourselves and to our own ambitions and dreams and our own sense of self-preservation and satisfaction and comfort and pleasure and all those things, when we say no to ourselves, we are at the same time saying yes to something else. And the yes that we're saying, the something else that we're saying yes to is the cross. And it's not, sometimes I give this impression, or maybe I get this impression, but I'm wrong. It's not that God just randomly decides that, hey, like some Marine recruiter, let's just make it as tough as we can on them so we get the best of the best in here. God didn't just randomly decide, hey, I'm going to want these people to follow me, so I'm just going to make them carry a cross. See how tough they are. Toughen them up. It's not God saying, hey, here's the requirements for this most important thing. You got to carry a cross just because you got to, because you got to be tough. You got to be. That's not what's going on. And sometimes I think we preachers give that impression. It dawned on me, no, we have to carry a cross because Jesus had to carry a cross because of what I just said. Because to follow God and to live the life we were created to live and to shine that light means that the dark world's not going to like it, and they're going to stand against us, even the religious people, because people don't like that in their face. They don't like the mirror that shows the true nature of their heart, and so they will shut you up. They will stand against you. If you have a school that has the audacity to believe and expect and demand that its students follow a biblical morality that includes sex inside of marriage only, and that only between a man and a woman, then you will have the world say, you don't even deserve to be in the Sweet 16 because you're a college that follows the biblical call to behavior. But yet ORU has just been thrashed. Oh, didn't you want them to win last night? I want them to take the whole thing. Amen. But they had to bear a cross. And their coach had to bear a cross. And I wish I'd brought the quote, but I was reading the USA Today editorial, and this lady just calls it the outdated, backwards, it's called all these views of morality. See, a couple of weeks ago I said in 10, 20 years we're going to have to struggle and suffer for our faith, and Brother Greg called me on it. Now I'm beginning to think Brother Greg's right. He said 10 to 20 years, how about 5 years? Man, things are changing. God isn't demanding that we take up a cross because he just wants us to, because he knows we will have to. And it's been that way for 2,000 years. Jesus was crucified. He was abused. He was slandered, blasphemed. He was spat upon, all those things. And he was perfect. And he was loving. Again, loving doesn't mean feel good, nice. He wasn't real nice to the Pharisees and the hypocrites. He spoke the truth, but he did it in love. And if you and I seek to live and speak the truth in love, we're not always real good about doing it in love, Baptists and Christians. But even if we do it in love, it doesn't matter. We're homophobic, we're this phobic, we're hate speech, all these types of things. I'm not trying to get on that one. It's just that's the one that's so prominent right now. And perhaps like Jesus, our superpower is taking up our cross. That's what he says. You must take up your cross. And you know this, but I just want to remind you that there's two ways that the initial audience heard this, at least. Jesus said it to a group of people, his disciples, and he called the rest of them around. He hadn't been to the cross yet. Now, he just got finished saying, I'm about to die. and I'm going to be, what does he say? I'm going to be rejected by the elders, chief priests, scribes. I'm going to be killed. So he's telling them it's going to happen, but they're not thinking about a cross. So when Jesus says to them, if you want to follow me, you've got to take up your cross. They do know what that means. They're not associating it with him yet, but that initial audience realizes, because they had seen that anytime the Roman government wants to send a message, not only of punishment, but a message to the rest of these opposed and oppressed peoples that they are ruling over, that if someone stands against the Roman government, commits a high treasonous and a murderous act, and in the worst of the worst, they want to make an example of them, and so they will march them out carrying their own cross. And they've seen this. It's not on a daily basis, but they've seen it regularly. They had just seen it a week or so before, and Pilate had done it several times. And so you take these enemies of the state and you strip them naked in their shame, and especially for a Jewish person, I mean, that's pretty shaming for most of us, but especially a Jewish person, and you put the crossbeam on their shoulders, and they carry it through a crowded marketplace where everyone will see, and they carry it outside the city, and then they put it up on the vertical beam, and they nail them into it, or they tie them into it, and then they let them hang there for days and eventually die from asphyxiation in a very humiliating, painful demonstration of Roman power and subjugation, to say this is what happens. So they'd seen that before. The best image, the best image I can think. I used to say something like, because it's a form of execution. It's a form of execution by the state. So today it'd be like, take up your lethal injection needle. The image I get is more like, and I don't know if this is real. This is probably just Hollywood, but the old West movies, where it's hanging time, and whole town shows up and has a picnic. Again, I don't know if that really happened. It probably did, but whole town shows up and has a picnic, and they go watch these condemned criminals be hung, and that's it's a public spectacle. That's the image I get, and people just taking all that out on them. And so they knew what that meant. That meant that to take up your cross meant that you had been tried and condemned and found guilty by the state and were deserving of death, which means you also lost all property rights, and you were disowned by your family, and they were shamed and you were shamed, and your life was forfeit. All you had to do now is carry the cross to the end. But it's over for you. And so they knew that Jesus was talking about that. But then there's Mark's and Matthew's and Luke's audience who both get this, but thinking about Luke's audience and Mark's, they already know Jesus went to the cross. So now that they're hearing it, they know the story. They know that Jesus was telling what he was going to do. And so this cross becomes more than just that. It becomes the very plan of God, not just the opposition of the world, but the very fact of what it is going to take to, in sacrificial love, save the world. And so to take up the cross, when we're hearing this, it's both realizing that we're going to be opposed, often violently, and maybe even to our death. Well, God wouldn't let us die. He's been doing it for 2,000 years. We're not supposed to worry about that if what we have waiting on us is better. So don't think somehow that, well, God won't let me die for witnessing for him. No. I mean, that's why the word witness, which is the Greek word martyr, came to mean martyrdom, because if you were to be faithful in witnessing to God eventually, you're going to die. Martyr doesn't mean die for your faith. It just means to be a witness. But those who did, that's what happened. It's not just that. It's taking up a cross means loving even your enemies and doing whatever it takes to truly love and meet their need, to help bring them to God. And so we hear all that, and we realize that this is not an easy thing, but it's not just a requirement, as I said. It is what's going to happen. And if we're going to follow Jesus, then we need to be ready to realize that it's going to cost us, maybe even our lives. And that's why he says after this, you have a choice. You can either preserve your life and seek to keep all of your pleasures and dreams and plans and everything and just, or you lay them all at Jesus' feet and you say, God, here's my life. And I know it's going to be filled with good things and pleasures because you're a God who has pleasures evermore, but also know it's going to be filled with problems and suffering if I take this seriously and try to follow you. And I find it interesting that Luke, Matthew, Mark, all three of the Synoptic Gospels tell this story, but Luke adds a little interesting note to it. But if go ahead and show me the verse from Luke, I think it's 14. Oh, no, you're right, it's 23, sorry. After they had condemned Jesus and beat him, and again, I don't know if you get all the details, it's awful, okay? And the point isn't all the pain he went through, the point's the cross and why he did it. But they had whipped him and to the point of death and brought him back, and they had put the crown of thorns on him, and he was just probably almost an unrecognizable mass of flesh and blood, and he just weakened. And so when they come, and the cross probably wasn't really like this. It was just the crossbeam. And that is what the men would carry. This would be waiting on them, and they would attach them at the scene, and they would nail them in and then raise this up. But it's this crossbeam that they would be carrying. And so Jesus is carrying that, it's crossbeam, and he doesn't have enough strength to do it. So much for superhero strength. He doesn't have enough strength to do it, and he probably keeps falling. And so there's this guy named Simon. He's from northern Africa. And he's in town probably for the festival of the Passover. He's probably a Jewish convert, maybe just a Jewish who's been dispersed to that area. And he's got his sons Alexander and Rufus with him. We don't know anything about his wife. She may have been there as well. We don't know. And they're just coming in from the country to celebrate the Passover and to be around for the feast. But they hear the noise, they see what's going on, and so and they happen for some unfortunate reason to be on that part of the street whenever Jesus passes by and probably falls for his last time there. And the soldiers realize that, hey, we can't let him die before we get to that. Pilate won't be happy, and so they just randomly, and they pick this guy, and it's Simon of all people. He's got his boys there with him, probably pretty young. And they bring Simon up, and they say, hey, you carry the cross. I mean, that wasn't what Simon planned. It was a surprise to him. And I imagine he wanted to just kind of, he's kind of hiding between the crowd. But no, they had his eye on him. They picked him out randomly. They come pull him up. They stick there. So he gets underneath there, and he just, they put the cross beams on him, maybe tie him to him. And then Luke tells us specifically that once they placed on him the cross, then, and Luke's the only one who tells us this part of it, he carries it behind Jesus. He follows Jesus up to the cross. The other ones just tell us he carries it, but Luke has just told us a couple of times that we're supposed to follow behind Jesus. If anyone wants to come behind me, it's the same phrase in Luke 9. And so Simon is carrying the cross all the way up. And can you imagine what that must have been like? Surprise, annoyance. I mean, this is not what I planned. It's painful. Not only that, and he's reluctant because this isn't what he wanted, and he's embarrassed now. And now, can you imagine too? That, not to be gross, let's just be realistic. That crossbeam stinks, and it's wet. It's wet with blood and sweat. And it's not his. It's bad enough having your own sweat and blood. Now he's grabbing somebody else's sweaty and bloody thing, and he puts it on him, and he's feeling that on his neck and everything else, and it's heavy. And then all those people are jeering, and they're casting insults, and he knows they're going to him, but he's part of it now. So now he's feeling that from them, and he's got to be angry and wondering what in the world, and maybe even angry at Jesus because he doesn't know what's going on. And he follows him, and they go all the way up to the place of the skull, hearing all the ridicule and the jeers, the rejection. And though the gospel writers don't tell us, I think something happened to him on the way. There is church tradition, but even just in what the gospel tells us, Mark, when he tells this story, he adds, Luke adds the little thing there, Mark adds something else. Mark says Simon. They all say Simon. They all say he's from Cyrene, northern Africa. Mark adds this, Oh, and his two sons were with him, Alexander and Rufus. Why would you mention Simon's name and where he's from? And why would you mention Alexander and Rufus? Well, it could be because Mark was primarily writing his gospel to people in Rome. And if you read the end of Romans, you discover that Paul talks about, or in Paul's letters, he talks about, will you greet Rufus in Rome, a leader? Now, there's no guarantee it's the same person, but I bet you it is. I bet you it is. And why would he mention Simon's name? Because I think, and church tradition agrees, that somewhere along the way, maybe that day, maybe between then and Pentecost, because also in Acts chapter 2 in Pentecost, it specifically says that there's a group of people from Cyrene there that responded. Somewhere in the process, he went from anger and embarrassment and shame of carrying Jesus' cross and decided that he needed to carry his own cross too. And he gave his life to Jesus. Some tradition has him end up being one of the pastors at the church in Antioch late in the first century. We don't know for sure. I do believe it changed his life. And so Luke gives us this beautiful picture of what it means to follow Jesus. And consider how Simon's reaction might be ours as well when we come across this unexpected cross, this unexpected suffering, this unexpected rejection from those around us. Consider how that might be for us. Surprise. Why is this happening to me? Why do I have to suffer? I'm just trying to live right. Why do these people reject me? Why does my boss overlook me for this raise just because I want Sundays off or just because why? Or maybe we're annoyed. This really puts into disarray my plans. I got plans, Jesus. Why do I have to do that? Like Simon. Or maybe we're reluctant. I'm not ready for this. I can't handle it, God. I can't handle the cross and what this means. Or maybe we're embarrassed. If I speak up, if I try to share my faith, they'll laugh at me. I can't let anybody see me like that. Simon becomes our example because the cross we carry is the cross Jesus carried, and he gives it to us to follow him. Somewhere in the early church, a couple of centuries later perhaps, they wrote a hymn to Simon, about Simon of Cyrene. And in that hymn it says this, O Simon, whose name means hearkening, thou didst hearken unto the words of Jesus, who spoke to that other Simon, saying, take up thy cross and follow me. His cross became thy cross. And so, partaking of his sufferings, thou dost now partake of his life, light, and glory. Isn't that beautiful? So we're called to take up our cross, which means that if we follow Jesus, if we follow the light of the world, the darkness of the world will oppose us and stand against us. It's just going to happen. Don't be surprised. It also means that God's got a big picture going on. He's got a plan that we're part of, and his plan is to redeem and save the world, which means every day may bring an opportunity, not only for opposition as you seek to be honest and follow him in your carrying your cross, but also for an opportunity for you to do what Jesus was doing, and that is sacrificial love to help meet and alleviate the needs of others. And so this very day, you may come across a friend, a neighbor, a family member. Tomorrow at work, you may come across someone who is hurting or in pain, and you may realize that there's an opportunity, a need in carrying your cross to help sacrificially love them and meet their need. It may be putting aside your plans and accepting the interruption. It may be going and taking a meal. Don't discount the power of taking a meal to somebody in need. Our meal train is a cross-bearing activity. You think, well, that's not really suffering. No, but you're sacrificing, and those little things add up. You're doing whatever it takes. It may mean just blocking off your afternoon because you saw that a neighbor needed help moving, but you're doing whatever it takes in the name of the Lord. You're bearing your cross. You're doing those things. And you're not trying to fix problems. That's part of our problem, isn't it? We see somebody in need, or even our own needs, and we just want to fix it. We see some friends want to fix it, and we want to fix the problems of the world. We want to fix the hunger. We want to fix all this type of stuff. And the problem is that's above your pay grade. That's God's area. What he calls you to do is not to fix the problem, but to carry a cross, to bear the problem, to be with. And even that small gift of a meal or that small gift of time or of money, even that resisting the urge to fight back or call or talk back to someone who ridicules you or insults you because of your faith or of your religious post online or your rejection by the media that you ought to be in the Sweet 16. How you respond, how you bear that cross, even in the midst of the ridicule, speaks a witness. And I said the cross was a superpower. Jesus said in John, he said, if I'm lifted up, and he's not talking about singing praise to him, though that's good too. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about the cross. When I am lifted up from the earth, there's a superpower there. What does it do? It draws all people to himself. And when you and I carry our cross following Jesus, and that is lifted up like his cross, in a different way, but when we're following in that, then it draws people. People see it. Even in our death, even in our suffering, people see and they notice there's something different there, and they are drawn to the cross. They're drawn to faith. And so Jesus isn't just trying to lay a burden on us. He's preparing us. This is what it's like to follow me. And you've got to make a decision. Is the beauty and the value of discovering your true purpose and life as God created and gave it to you, is it worth it in the glory that awaits? Is it worth it, or are you going to choose the pleasures of sin for a season and the joys of self-security? He said you've got to make a choice. Are you going to lose your life for my sake potentially so that you can keep this? But in doing that, you will destroy your life. It's not because that's the way he wants it to be, it's because of the way it is. Take up your cross and follow me. Opposition, shame, suffering, death, sacrifice. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was famous for saying that when Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. I was reading an article this week by a guy named Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He is the leading expert in the effects of trauma on people. He said this: I think trauma really does confront you with the best and the worst. You see the horrendous things that people do to each other, but you also see resiliency, the power of love, the power of caring, the power of commitment, the power of commitment to yourself and to others, the knowledge that there are things that are larger than our individual survival. And in some ways, I don't think you can appreciate the glory of life unless you also know the dark side of life. And Dr. van der Kolk shares that when he first began his practice in the early 70s, he was working at the VA during the Vietnam era. And he remembers that the very first person he saw was a Vietnam veteran who had had terrible nightmares coming out of that war. And he'd happened to study nightmares and their effects, so he kind of was familiar with it with sleep studies, and he knew how to treat it. So he prescribed medicine to the man. He said, take that, and it'll make the nightmares go away. 2 weeks later, the veteran came back to him. And so the doctor said to him, so how did the medicines work? And he wasn't prepared for the answer. The veteran looked at him and said, I didn't take your medicines, because I realized I need to have my nightmares, because I need to be a living memorial to my friends who died in Vietnam. He said, and that statement was the opening of my fascination about how people become living testimonials for things that no longer exist, but they need to hold it in their hearts and minds and bodies and brains. The loyalty to the dead, the loyalty to what was, just blew me away. I read that, and I realized that's part of why we take up our cross, and we do it daily. It means every day we're ready. So we don't know what's around the next bend, but we're ready. We're ready and expecting opposition. We're ready and we're expecting the nightmare and the struggle. And every day that we take up our cross is why a couple of weeks ago I asked you, maybe to find a cross to wear, a cross in your house, or put somewhere prominent so that you'll be reminded and will be a living testimonial to Jesus dying on the cross. That's why Paul says that when he was in Corinth, and everywhere he went, I only wanted to know one thing among you, Christ and him crucified. That draws. And we're living testimonies and reminders of that. And then it hit me, Adam, come on up. Then it hit me that that's why we take the Lord's Supper. We're to take up our cross daily, and we are to take the Lord's Supper as often as we can. Because what does Paul tell us? That when we eat the bread and when we drink the cup, what are we proclaiming? It's always confounded me that he just puts it this way, but what are we we're proclaiming his death until he comes. And I always add, in his resurrection. And that's true, but that's not what he said. When we eat the bread and drink the cup, we are proclaiming his death. We are reminding ourselves that we are living testimonials to Jesus dying on the cross. And we too are to take up our cross. Bow your heads, close your eyes. We'll just give you a moment to think about the cross of Christ that I have described this morning. And it's easy to fixate on the gory details, and they are gory, and they are painful. But that was never the point. The point is the purpose. The point is that all of the sins of the world, all of the guilt and shame and pain and suffering were poured out on Christ. That cross meant all of that. And Jesus, in love, bore our rejection and our shame. He bore our sins. He carried on himself the guilt and the shame, becoming a sin offering for us. And the Apostle Paul says that we as believers, we are crucified with Christ. And we no longer live, but Christ lives in us. In the life we now live in this body, we live by faith and the faithfulness of the Son of God who loved us and gave himself for us. Galatians 2:20. Think about the cross. Think about Simon of Cyrene being thrown underneath that cross to carry. Think about how it changed him. And can you hear this morning the voice of our Lord Jesus calling to you? Saying, come, follow me. Take up your cross. I'll be with you. I showed you how to do it. I'll not leave you alone. I'll walk with you. It's not going to be easy, my child, but we'll do it together. And oh, the glory that awaits. Father, prepare our hearts to take up your cross, Jesus, to eat of the bread and drink from the cup, to remember your broken body, your shed blood, to be a living testimonial to the very love of God for the world that gave his only Son, that we might have life. In Jesus' name, amen. I want you to take the cup, turn it over, and peel back the bread part.